Hi everyone, so I wanted to make a video specifically for those who are doing performance assessments at WGU, and this specific video is going to help you and me because it's kind of an opportunity for me to reflect. It's going to help you and me think about the best practices for essentially doing an assessment in one day, which I have done many times. So far, I have completed 4 courses and I'm on the 5th one, and each assessment has about each course has about 3 assessments. So I've been able to get through a lot, most of them in a day or two, and this is my process, so I'm going to share that with you. Okay, so the first thing that I do is I always set up my document the night before. So let's say I'm going to be doing my assessment starting in the morning the next day. So let's say it's a Saturday, then I'm going to do it, meaning tomorrow is a Saturday. On Friday night, I open a past paper and I set up it as a template, and I strip out all the content, and then I put all the titles in that I'm going to be writing about, even if I know nothing about them. And you go to the rubric and you essentially take those titles from the rubric and you put them in, and that is your starting point. In a way, it tricks the mind, or at least my mind, in thinking, oh, I've already got the ball rolling. And it feels like there's a little bit of momentum before you've even started. So when you start the next day, it's kind of like, oh, I'm just picking off where I left off, even though you really haven't done much. And part of that is having your title page set up. All you're doing is switching up some of the words, and then your references at the end. You kind of take out the other ones, but then have your references titled. I kind of lock it into that page, so that when I'm typing, the references isn't moving around. So you can break the page and then set it at the top of the last page. So the next thing that I'll do generally is I tend to scan. Let's say the next day and I'm starting. I tend to scan all of the questions that are in the criteria for what I'm writing about, and I scan them not to kind of hyper analyze them or try to start to problem solve the questions. I just want a general overview of what they're asking for. So for example, if they're asking for me to talk a little bit about a specific strategy or a specific concept, I kind of make note, okay, they're looking for one strategy here and then another one there. And I kind of think about what are those main things that they're looking for, and I kind of make notes so that I can go in the textbook shortly afterwards and look for that information. And let's say that I'm not really sure about what to write about. So it talks about a theory, and I don't really know. They only want like a couple components about the theory. They don't want a lot. What I'll generally do afterwards, I do this quick scan, is I'll go watch a video on the theory. Even before I open the textbook, which is digital, it's online, I'll go watch a video or two, and I even put them on like 1.5 speed or 2 speed, just to quickly hear that information from someone else. Whether it's all accurate or not doesn't really matter to me. What it helps me do is just get a visual indicator of what these concepts are, because a lot of times they're showing pictures and images and diagrams, and somebody's usually walking through some sort of model. And so I can visually understand it. And then just hearing a perspective other than the way my brain interprets the textbook is useful. And particularly if I'm doing this approach for multiple videos. I'm not usually just watching one, I'm usually watching 2 or 3, and I watch them quickly. So that it's kind of like a preview to a movie. I don't know if you've ever watched a movie and you knew nothing about it, and sometimes you're thinking, well, what is this movie going to be about? Or at least my mind. But if you watch the preview, in a way, it primes you and gives you a little bit of an indicator of what to expect. So this is what this is doing. So the next thing is that I acknowledge that what I'm going to be doing is working in chunks, because the way WGU works is that you're writing papers in chunks. So it'll be like section A is going to talk about this, and section B could actually be not related to section A, even though there is generally, you could argue there's a tie between most things, but sometimes there isn't a strong tie or strong link. So I'm kind of looking at how I'm going to work in chunks. So the first chunk is A, and A might be 1, it might be 1A, 1B, 1C. And then from there, I kind of go into the textbook and start to look closer at that information. The first thing I'll always do is go to, let's say it's talking about a theory on like a developmental psychology theory or something, I'll go into that chapter, that summary of that section of the chapter, and I'll read the summary. So it gives me another indicator of kind of like the general concepts. And from there, I feel like I have a pretty good understanding of what the ideas are. If I'm really unclear, then I'll go to the direct page that they're talking about something and I'll read about it and make more notes and may go watch another video. But I'm trying to do this very quickly. I'm not trying to become an expert at it. I just want a good general high-level understanding with some details. And so I'll do that for like one chunk within what's required of the paper and the criteria. Now, usually in a chunk, they're not just asking you to report on and write about something directly from the textbook. They might ask you to start like that. So maybe it's on instructional theories or let's say an instructional model. It may ask you to like, well, what's the purpose of that? And then therefore you could go into the textbook and probably find some explanation on the purpose. But that's usually the starting stone. It's asking you to go deeper and relate it to your own experiences. So what I do is whatever they're asking me to write about, I really acknowledge the first examples that come to my mind, because again, they're asking me to relate it to my own experience, and I try not to overthink it. Whatever comes to my mind. So because I'm in curriculum and instruction, it's generally about those things, and whatever project comes up that I've delivered or whatever scenario comes up, I just quickly jot that down. And then I kind of write out some of the details like in bullet points so I can try to remember that experience, because sometimes it's hard to remember if I taught that kind of idea or project or course years ago. And then I stop and I ask myself, do I know enough about this to continue writing enough that I could write a couple paragraphs and write some details? And if I think yes, then I'll continue along with that example. If I say no, I'm not sure, I may actually just brainstorm another example. But what I'm doing here is just gauging, am I competent enough? I don't have to be an expert either. That's the thing about this university. They're not looking for you to be an expert at the content. They're looking for you to have enough working knowledge on the topic that you can be deemed as competent. So if it's good enough, I just run with it. I choose that as my example, and I trust myself to just be able to free write. And that's the next step, is I start in one of those chunks, I start free writing my example. Again, if it's asking you to write about an example. Sometimes it doesn't, but if it is. And I free write, which means I don't stop myself from writing. I just write. And I think a lot of people have a tendency to try to edit themselves while they're writing, and that slows down the process of writing, because you're constantly thinking, oh, I should word it like this, I should change it like that. So for me, I'm just dispensing ideas. And if you do that and don't get in your own way, you can write a lot. And you may stop and you may think, well, I'm not sure what to write next. But you just kind of pause and then you keep going. Another idea will surface if you let yourself pause for enough time, something will pop up. Now, if you have absolutely no clue what to write about, then you might need to kind of parse that experience and write it out and mind map it and brainstorm it a bit more. But for me, my way of brainstorming is free writing. Now, then I'll go back after I've written that section and I'll read it. And I'll read it with a little bit of a critical eye and say, do I even make sense? Like, is this making sense to me and potentially other people? If I'm reading it and not really clear about what I'm talking about, then I'll kind of go back with a critical eye and start to add terms and words and rearrange some things. But a lot of time it makes sense, at least for me, because I'm at a master's level. You have experience writing in the past, and a lot of it I have experience. I'm comfortable with talking about my experiences. So maybe it works for me because I'm comfortable with that. So after I kind of go through and make sure it makes sense, then what I do is I go back and I see if there's anything I feel like is missing. Like maybe there's a missing detail. So if I kind of go through and I feel, oh, I'm kind of being a bit general here, I'll just think I'm missing kind of another example. So I'll just quickly give an example. Let's say it's about a project and I need an example about a learning outcome from the project. I'll just plant it in there. And, when I'm doing that, I actually just highlight in there, like kind of change the color in the background of the text of where I'm missing something. And then I just kind of make a note of what I might be missing. And then I trust myself again. I'm just thinking very quickly what might come to my mind. And then I'm writing about it. eventually, when I get to a place where I'm happy with the overall content, meaning the ideas, the concepts, and I feel like the writing is pretty good, I go into that chunk. So again, chunk 1A and maybe 1A and 1B, kind of I put them together in a way, and I read it for revisions. Meaning I'm just now looking at the grammar, I'm looking at some of the sentence structure more critically, more detailed, and I just do that once. And section 1 is going to be pretty much done. Like, I'm done that section. I can check it off my list. It's been thought about, it's been written about, it's been revised. I'm moving on to section next part. Now, sometimes the second part is related to the first part, and sometimes I'll summarize what I said in the first part. Something I realized with good writing is you have to signpost, meaning explain what you're doing, meaning what you're going to be writing about. It might seem a little bit awkward and obvious to do that. Like, for example, at the beginning of a paragraph, I might say, I'm going to be talking about a specific example and I'm going to relate it to certain justifications by doing this. And even though you're going to be doing that, and I'm kind of, in a way, it seems like a little bit redundant to deliberately say I'm doing this and doing it, it helps the reader understand what to expect. And because the evaluators are probably evaluating information quite quickly, it's kind of pointing to them, I'm talking about what you want me to talk about, and I'm going to do that right here. So in that next chunk, I'll say, this is what I'm going to be talking about in this chunk. And then maybe there's a third chunk, section 3 from the rubric, and say, in this chunk, I'm going to be writing about this. And even at the end of each chunk, I'll generally summarize a little bit, even if it's just a sentence or two of, this is what I've talked about. So it's kind of like sandwiching what I'm talking about. And the reason why I do that is, again, in order to signal to the evaluator that I have indeed done what you've asked me to do. So for example, in the rubric, if it's saying write 2 specific examples related to this specific theory, that's how I'm going to signpost. I'm writing about these 2 things. I'm relating to theory by doing this. So again, I'll kind of revise that second section. And then when that's done, I'll go to the third and revise that. And before, I get to the very end, what I like to do, let's say I'm kind of at the second chunk, moving on to the third chunk, I'll then open the portal where I submit, and I'll have everything ready. Meaning I'll have logged in, I've gone to the assignment section, I'll go to the submission section, I'll go to the upload section, I'll click the button to upload, so that when I'm done, and I should mention before I finish writing the last bit, I will do one final, I'll print everything out and I'll read it on paper, because I find reading on paper picks up on some of the errors. So even though I've done the final revision for 1 and 2 and then 3, I'll do the one final one, but don't spend a lot of time, and I don't usually need to spend a lot of time because, again, I've already done that. But what I'm getting at is, once I've done that, it's easy for me to just drag it into the submission portal and click the button to check for plagiarism. Once you get your score and it says you're fine, then you submit it. Because I find if you're doing this all in one day, it can be very tiring by the end to have to go through these details. Like, even just logging on sometimes and having to figure out how to submit, it can be annoying. So once it's all ready for you, you just feel like, okay, click, drag. And I submit mine as a PDF. I know that other people probably submit it as a Word document, but I find I'm just comfortable with PDF because I know that, the text alignments and everything aren't going to move, because if you have a different version of Word, sometimes things can get shifted around, right? So I submit it as a PDF. Even if it's a presentation and not a paper, I submit it as a PDF as well, and not a PowerPoint. But I don't use PowerPoint, I use InDesign. And I'm going to do another presentation or another video on how I do presentations as a performance assessment, because not all performance assessments are papers, and that's a very interesting experience as well. So I'm going to talk about that. So hopefully this was helpful, and let me know if you have any questions in the comments below, and I will try to get back to you. And if not, then hopefully I'll pick up on it later on and include it as part of another video. So thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.